So good evening and welcome. We are recording this. It's the 4th of May and I'm Martin Gilbraith. And I'm very grateful to IAF Belgium for inviting me for this evening's session. I'm going to share my screen to say just a few words about what we have planned before I invite you to introduce yourselves. Just to say, first of all, there's a story behind this session. Is there a single universal principle of facilitation? And it relates to the IAF meetups, because in a very early meetup of IAF England and Wales in London, probably in around about 2015, Sean Blair, who some of you may know as a LEGO Serious Play practitioner, posed a question in the meetup. He said, is there such a thing as a single universal principle of facilitation? And I took all of about 5 seconds and said, well, I've got one. And it's ORID. And I went on to explain. And that was the germ of a blog post, first of all. And then it was the germ of a session, which I ran first at the IAF Stockholm conference in 2015. So I've run this session a few times at conferences, and for other face-to-face circumstances and online. I'm very pleased to share it with you again here tonight. The shape of the session is like this. First of all, I'll be demonstrating ORID. ORID is, I'll explain more obviously, but ORID is the structure by which the focused conversation method of ICA's technology of participation is based. So I'll be demonstrating ORID through the focused conversation by leading you in a focused conversation of the role of the facilitator. And then I'll be switching from the role of facilitator to the role of trainer to talk through the 4 levels of ORID with you and how it applies to the focused conversation method. And then I'll be sharing some examples of how I've applied ORID in focused conversation and more broadly in my own practice. And then I'll be sharing some sources of further information and support on my own blog and elsewhere. It might be around 75 minutes. It could be a bit more, it could be a bit less, depending on how interested you are. It'll be very simple in terms of technology. We'll be having a short breakout conversation about halfway through, but otherwise it'll be largely in plenary. I do encourage you to use the chat to introduce yourselves, to chit-chat with each other, to share reflections and ask questions. I won't necessarily notice your questions right away and respond to them right away, but I will try and come back to them, if not during the demonstration conversation, then certainly afterwards. A couple more words about me and about ORID. So you've heard a little bit about my background with IAF. I've been involved with IAF for as long as I've been a professional facilitator, really, which is since about 1997, which is when I went to my first IAF Europe conference. That's also more or less when I began providing facilitation and facilitation training to clients. At the time employed by ICA. ICA is the Institute of Cultural Affairs, which is an international non-profit in about 40 countries, including the UK and Belgium. Prior to 97, I was working with ICA in its grassroots community work in India and Egypt. And that's how I got into participatory working. And through working with facilitation in local community settings, I got into professional facilitation. ToP is the technology of participation, which is the methodology developed by ICA and applied by ICA over the past 50-odd years. And it's very much the core of my practice, as you will see. More on all of that as we go on. I think that's more than enough from me, though. I would love to hear something about some of you and to give you an opportunity to hear something about each other. And I would like to hear some of your voices, but I'm not going to ask every one of you to speak in turn because that would take far too long. What I would like to invite you to do is to respond in the chat to the question that I've just posted. What experience do you have, if any, of ORID and ICA's ToP methodology? And what questions do you have, if any? And my question in the chat was a little abbreviated, apologies for that. So if none, that's perfectly fine. You're in the right place. If you have any, then we'd love to hear about it. and I'll invite a few of you to say something about what you've written and what you've read in the chat, but I'll just give you a moment or two to write. So several have written none. Rick has used ORID a little.
Yeah, we work in the Lab Future Center in the Netherlands, and the ORID is one of our standard practices. We have like 10 base practices. The ORID is one of them we use because it's you can apply it to, as you probably will tell us later on, to lots of things. And one of my colleagues even wrote a book about it. She calls it Decisions by Design, which I can recommend. The
Very
top
good.
one, by the way, I always wonder if we call it differently, because I always see your name at the top, but I never know what exactly is the specific thing at the top.
Ah, well, you're in the right place then. Thank you. I see Michel is here. He attended one of my training sessions in Brussels a couple of years ago. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Martin. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I do recommend this method. It's not very complicated, and I think with only the principles, the main principle can be applied, or you can go deeper and follow strictly the whole methodology. But having in mind the main principle helps a lot, according to my own experience.
Thank you. Thank you. And a few others of you have said you've used it or attended sessions as well. Anybody, let's hear a few other voices. Who would like to say something about what you wrote or what you've read in the chat? Please go ahead and raise your hand, or just, we're a small enough group, you're welcome to open your microphone and speak. I should say, by the way, I can be very comfortable with silence.
I'm a silent savior. I'm a silent savior. I'm here. Don't worry. Don't worry. I'm always taking my time, following some guidance have been said. But here's the question to all of you, back to all of you facilitators. Would that be the preferable and the most favorite method of facilitators of IAF? This is my question. Is it one of your favorite, all of you, and why?
Thank you. Thank you. Good question. I shall come back to that later. Anybody else? Anything you'd like to comment on that you wrote or that you read? David, yes, please.
I have when I see a facilitation technique that looks easy, I develop an immediate mistrust for the traps that are inherent. And it's a bit like open space, you know, you can look at open space, you gotta go, yeah, okay, I can do this. And then I become suspicious.
Fair enough.
I think I think I need to be careful, or we need to be careful, whatever, about facilitation techniques that look easy.
Sure. Thank you. Anyone else? Any reactions? Or any common themes in what you've read?
Well, I'm just thinking about what I wrote, that ORID is one of my go-to techniques, and it's true. And I'm thinking to just now, well, why is that true? And I think it's partly because it puts kind of like speed bumps in the conversation. You know, so you actually pause, and they build on each other. There's a natural evolution, but it focuses the conversation, which is what the name of the tool says, focused conversation. But it also has a way of just making us slow down and say, okay, so what did we hear? What did we, etc.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any common themes among what you've read or what you've heard?
I think a lot of us here eager to hear about it and learn, because there's a lot of people that are fresh. So sure. What does this conversation so far tell us about what you might hope to learn tonight? Anyone? By the way, you will have learned by now that I'm not here to tell you everything right away. I'm going to start by asking questions in case you hadn't noticed. What does this conversation so far tell us about what we might hope to learn together tonight?
Seems to be interactive, something to say already.
Thank you, absolutely. Anyone else?
I think it's demonstrated curiosity. You've got a curious audience.
Fantastic. Thank you. Anyone else? In that case, finally, for our introductions, what are your hopes for the session? Write a word or two in the chat if you would, please. Some of you have articulated hopes already. I will grasp it all, says Anastasia. That sounds like a hope to me. Inspiration, insight, confidence, getting to the point, practicing it, magic. So no pressure then. New angles, new ideas. To hear the perspectives of those who are new to ORID. I always enjoy that. Excellent. Well, thank you. As I say, I'm going to start by demonstrating the method before I talk you through it. And to demonstrate the method, I'm going to suggest that I lead you in a conversation about the role of the facilitator. So I'm going to share my screen again. And, oh, I better just make sure that I'm sharing my screen optimized for video. I am. I'm going to lead you in a conversation about the role of the facilitator. And kick us off by showing a short video clip entitled "What Do Facilitators Do Really?" We're rather honoured tonight to be have among us the creator of the video clip, Beatrice. Thank you for joining. Every time I've used this clip many times for conversations like this. It works really well. It's always great for a conversation about facilitation. Lovely little clip. As I say, it's about 4 minutes long. It introduces the role of the facilitator in terms of 3 dimensions, 3 metaphors. What I'm going to do is show you the clip and then lead you in a conversation about what we've seen and heard, how it relates to your experience of the role of the facilitator, and what can we learn from our conversation with each other and take away and apply in our own practice. The conversation should take probably about 15 or 20 minutes, including a short breakout group in the middle of it. And then after all of that, I'll come back in the role of trainer to explain how I've led the conversation. So if you're ready, go ahead and enjoy the video. Oh, excuse me.
Many people ask us, what do facilitators do, really? What value do we add? Effective facilitators fulfill at least 3 roles when working with a group. In the planning stage, we are like architects. We gather information about the group and its context, consulting with the client to clarify the purpose and desired outcomes of the facilitation. Then, we propose a design that we think will meet the group's needs. Our designs usually take the form of a results-based agenda. This is the blueprint we use when working with the group. Like any good structure, our agendas must be strong but flexible, capable of withstanding stress and of being adapted to the emergent realities of the situation. Once the agenda is designed and agreed to by the client, our role changes from that of architect to pilot. Now we must prepare carefully for the group's journey. We double-check the requirements of the meeting room, making sure that it is clean and arranged according to our specifications. We see that all printed material, handouts, and supplies such as easels, paper, and colored markers are available. We also make sure that those who will be fulfilling crucial support roles, such as note-takers, timekeepers, translators, sound technicians, and others, are ready to go. Once the group arrives in the meeting room, we need to brief them on the agenda and present any ground rules to be observed during the session. We explain our role as facilitator and answer any questions about the flight plan. During this phase, the facilitator's main goal is to clarify where the group is going and the map to get to the destination. Once airborne, meaning once the meeting has started, The facilitator as pilot must be constantly alert to changes in weather conditions as reflected in the group's mood. We must be ready to respond to unexpected turbulence and other threats to the group's safety, making mid-course corrections as necessary. Finally, we need to land the plane, bringing the group back to Earth with a sense of closure and gratitude for a safe, productive journey. While the skills of the architect and the pilot are fundamental to the facilitator's role, there is one other aspect that needs to be understood: the facilitator as guide. We need to lead the group through what is often unexplored territory. We must provide a calm, steady presence, capable of helping the group work through its moments of panic, doubt, disagreement, or despair. Like all good guides, we must be alert and resourceful, but above all, we need to transmit confidence in the processes we propose and the group's ability to face its challenges and make good decisions. This skill is obtained through our own inner work and lots of practice with groups. With these resources, we can stand in the heat of debate and transmit a clear message. Yes, we can. So there you have it, the 3 dimensions of a facilitator's role: architect, pilot, and guide. It is not necessarily an easy job, but it's never boring.
So there you have it, 3 dimensions of the facilitator role: architect, pilot, and guide. And apologies for oversharing there. I gather I was sharing my entire screen instead of just the video, so I hope you were able to watch the video anyway. So I'd like to take 15 or 20 minutes to lead you in a conversation about what you've seen and heard in the clip, and also how it relates to your experience, what we can learn from it, and what we can apply. But I'd like to start literally by asking you, what did you see and hear? And in particular, what words and phrases do you remember seeing and hearing from the clip? And I'd like to invite you to share some of those in the chat, first of all. So in the chat, if you would, what do you recall from the clip? Words, phrases, or images, characters, or music? And I'll give you a couple of moments to write. Do feel free to look at what others have written as you add any other words or phrases or images yourself. What about the images and characters? They're rather less easy to capture in words in the chat. Who would like to describe an image or a character that they saw in the clip? Please go ahead and open your mic and speak.
Sure. Jeffrey here. So we know we wear many hats, and very well illustrated with the three principal hats that we wear, and it makes it very easy for one person because we know we can change hats just like we can change roles, and there might even be a few other hats in our closet.
So it's the image of the hats that you're remembering, is it? Perfect. Thanks. Anybody else? What images or characters can you describe that you saw in the clip?
I think it's useful to note that shifting of uniforms, so that starting in one uniform and changing to the other, so that shifting of the different roles as you go through, maybe lines with Beatrice's idea of speed humps, these moments where we change from one thing to the other.
Thank you. So the image of the uniform. Yeah. Bess, what did you see?
Two things to add to what James just said is that the uniform needs to be identifiable. So if you're shifting from one kind of thing to another, it needs to be clear to the audience. And the other thing is, in your jungle, there were all sorts of different things to be afraid of, including a hat.
Does anybody remember any of the animals in the jungle? What animals did you see?
There was a snake.
There was a snake. Wasn't there a tiger? Did anyone see the bird in the windscreen? I always remember that.
Scared of birds then.
What characters do you remember besides the architect and the pilot and the guide? I remember there was a co-pilot and there were some passengers. Do you remember any others?
Poor clients.
Anyone else?
Participants.
Yeah, participants.
The participants, yeah.
All friendly people, though.
All friendly people. Apart from the animals in the jungle, they were quite scary, some of those.
I didn't notice those, so.
Was there anything surprising or intriguing for you in the clip? Somebody who's not yet spoken, please go ahead, open your mic and speak. Anything surprising or intriguing? And those of you with your cameras off, do please feel invited to speak as well. I can't see you, but we'd love to hear from you. Anything surprising or intriguing? I can be very comfortable with silence.
I know I've spoken already, Martin, but I think for me, what was really surprised me was that I could really 100% relate to the clip. There was not one part in it that I could think like, no, never experienced that, or don't think so. It was really like, yep.
So
I couldn't say it in another way.
Was there anything in particular in the clip that you related to? Anything that reminded you of experience?
Yes, it's quite. Sorry, Tanya.
Go ahead, Flo.
It's quite the same for me because my feeling is that I saw this clip maybe, I don't know if it's possible, but maybe 2 years or 3 years ago, and it doesn't make so much sense for me at this time. But now, yes, I feel very related for each step of the way. Each personage and so on, and specifically the landing. When you say the landing with a feeling of closure and clarity, and it's kind of my obsession.
Thank you. Perfect. Anybody else? Anything that was surprising or intriguing, or anything that reminded you of your own experience?
May I, Martin?
Please, Golly.
Yeah. First of all, every time I watch it, I try to do some self-reflection to see which parts I'm good or which parts I'm bad, which parts I need some progress. And it also reminds me of another thing of flight. And it always resembles to me that during a flight, the landing and takeoff is the part that most, accidents may happen. And I really like that when I saw that the pilot role and how it can relate to what we are doing, before in terms of designing, and also the time that we want to, help to reach the people to the ground, and to help them to reach to the desired outcomes and to the goals.
Thank you. Lovely. Anastasia and then Corinne, you have your hands raised. Please go ahead.
Well, I played this video this afternoon for one of my clients when I needed to explain one of the videos. I do that all the time. Since I know the video by heart, I will tell you what was the client response when she asked me, when she watched the video and asked me, so do you do all of that so you can take care of us? Then I told her, yep, I can. And what I can say, it always feels empowering and almighty when I let people know and I and when I reflect back that it's a very complex and multidimensional role, and indeed I encompass all of them. Empowering for me.
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you. Corinne, and then David.
Yes, thank you. Just a surprise is when the role of guide was mentioned, because the facilitator has to be neutral. So I was kind of wondering what would come up as guide. But then, of course, I understand the type of guide that was mentioned in the video. But it's interesting to also maybe have a thought about this neutral position that the facilitator should have.
Thank you. David? You're muted.
I don't know why, but there was the blueprints open on a wooden table, and the clips were on the side. I don't know why I noticed the clips. And I think and I've seen this video before. And just another thing that just to get back to what Godi was saying before, a little moment in my childhood, which probably was the very earliest facilitation experience I had, was going up the stairs of the Jumbo 747, you know, that bump they have, and going into the cockpit, because my father had a contact in the airport. I was with my parents. I must have been about 9 or 10, and the pilots turned around and looked at my mother, who's not of a nervous disposition, and she said, "Who's flying this thing?" And they said, "Don't worry, we're just here for the takeoff and landing."
Thank you. Thank you. Lovely story. What other metaphors come to mind for you when you think about the role of the facilitator? We've got 3 metaphors here, haven't we, of architect, pilot, and guide. Maybe they're just right for you. Maybe they're not quite perfect. Maybe you've got another metaphor that comes to mind. Anybody, what metaphors come to mind for you when you think of facilitation and the role of the facilitator? What's facilitation like? Sorry. Tanya and then Bess?
A juggler, so kind of
like a juggler, yeah.
Keep different balls in the air.
Yeah. Bess?
Cook.
Ah, like a cook? Yeah, say some more.
Yeah, you find these different ingredients, and sometimes spontaneously you have to combine things that weren't in the plan, but it makes a nicer flavor.
Lovely, thank you. Maria?
I think also I've heard the metaphor of a bridge, so connecting sort of both parties, but also people might have different opinions.
Thank you. Anastasia?
So I've added to these 3 roles in my social media take the 4th role, cheerleader, the person who believes in the beginning of the process that they can.
Thank you. Corinne?
I'm sorry, I don't know how to say this in English, so I hope...
Say it in your own language.
In French, it's the chef d'orchestre.
I don't know how to say that either, but I'm sure many of you...
Conductor.
Orchestra conductor.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Corinne. Michel?
Yeah, I would tell that's an improviser, someone obliged to do with what's happening just now.
Thank you. And Jeffer?
I'd say the facilitator as a witness, and also there as a person who stimulates the others to be a witness to what's happening in each individual and in the group.
Thank you. David?
I think it's the hummingbird that hovers in the air, isn't it? That just oversees the process and just is life in the air, overlooking everything.
Thank you. Yes, lovely. You're big on metaphors, you people, aren't you? This is fantastic. Rick?
Yeah, sometimes used when you in old city centers, you always have some living statue standing there.
Oh yes.
And sometimes the facilitator has that effect, not by doing so much, but just by being there and looking in a certain way, you already have effect.
Thank you. Thank you. Pierre?
Yeah, I see. Facilitator is a kind of conveyor belt. Bringing people from point A to point B, but without taking any position, neutral.
Thank you. Thank you. Last one, David, is this a fresh hand or an old hand?
It's a fresh hand, but I don't know if anybody else wants to say something because I've spoken before.
Yours is the last hand raised, I think, so go ahead.
Okay, it's not my idea, but it's on the cover of the book. Don't just do something, stand there, which is the Inuksuk, which is the pile of stones.
Oh yes.
And I read in a book once. It's the idea of the Inuksuk is that it doesn't move, it doesn't do anything, but people rely on it for direction.
Thank you. Very good. Sue, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, hello everybody. A stroker, without being too sensual about it, I think, you know, we're there to encourage and coax, to encourage and coax people to talk, to react, to listen, to move forward, to be active, to passive, you know, whatever the situation requires. We're there to gently, you know, be there to massage, if you like, that little bit of massage without being too heavy-handed, but just, you know, stroking on the outside, so to speak.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to invite Andrew to send you into breakout rooms if he's ready in a few minutes. And I'm going to put 2 questions in the chat, which I invite you to discuss in your breakout groups. We're going to send you into groups of about 3 or 4 people, I think, for about 6 or 7 minutes. And I invite you to discuss between you, are there any new insights from this clip or from the conversation we've been having that you could apply in your own practice? So any new insights that you could apply? And also, what would you add about the role of the facilitator? Is there anything that we've not mentioned? Anything that you would add, or anything that you would like to learn or practice more? That's kind of 3 questions actually, but I invite you to discuss those in your breakouts. Any questions about that, or is it clear? Looks like it's clear. So if you're ready, Andrew, please send them to breakouts. So we should see people coming back from the breakout rooms in just a few moments.
Yeah. All the best, Martin.
Thank you. They're obviously having good conversations. Oh, here they are. Here they are, all waiting till the last minute before they have to come back. Were you having good conversations? How was that?
Very good.
I'm seeing some nods. Feel free to use the emoticons in the reactions down the bottom if you like. You've got 1,000 different options down there now since Zoom upgraded a few days ago.
Well, I haven't upgraded. Just like, thank you, Martin.
You're really missing out on the emoticons. Thank you. Well, I'm sorry if that wasn't long enough, but I do like to keep my participants wanting more. And here is more. There is more to be had now we're back in plenary. Let's hear a little bit from some of you of your conversations in breakout. Who would like to share any new insights from your conversation so far that you could apply, or anything that you'd like to learn or practice more? Anyone? Go ahead, raise your hand or just open your mic and speak.
Yeah, I can share a bit of our group.
Please.
One person told that the architect is the most underestimated role. It's very important to be well prepared. It's like for a flight, you need a checkup. And it's also important being confident. Of course, you can improvise, but always being well prepared. Sometimes structure has to be robust, although sometimes you can rely on experience and you can come without structure in some contexts, but then you have an inner structure that helps you. But most of the time, it's very good to verify if beforehand if the context is okay, if the basic things are there, and then to provide a robust structure to help. Yeah, that was
thank you.
A point we've developed in our group. Yeah.
Very good. Have a plan A, B, and C, says Tanya in the chat. Absolutely. Bess, please go ahead.
Yeah, we had an interesting chat with Beatrice, who we were lucky to have her in our room. And one thing that we really dug into quite a bit was, what's the distinction between then and now in regard to online facilitation and managing energy. So we have a lot more of energy management responsibility than we used to have, and also the element of teaching. Last year it was more significant, but teaching people how to use Miro, teaching people where the on-off buttons are on Zoom, and all of that stuff, which isn't value added maybe to the subject matter, so you have to weave it in a way that's comfortable and pretty not time consuming. So people are comfortable, but they're also efficient when you're doing your work.
Thank you. Yes. Anybody else?
Well, I could add that conversation inspired me to think maybe we need to have take two on this. Leave this as the capsule that it is, and do updated version. That would be fun.
That would be a service to the profession. Thank you. Yes. Anyone else? Is that Jeff offering to help?
Yeah.
Jeff, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, no, I mean, because it's one of our initiatives this year is to try to figure out a universal definition for facilitator and facilitation. And it seems so simple, but it's so hard. 3 hats are not enough. We'd actually like it to be 1 hat, and 1 hat's not sufficient. So, and it looks like a juggler. It doesn't look serious. So there's a lot of considerations. But when something doesn't have a definition, it doesn't really exist for a lot of people. So this is so yeah, we would be up for actually Beatrice doing a take 2 and putting a little budget behind making it.
Thank you. There's an offer. Michel.
Yes, with Karin and Tanya, we discussed about a few points. What was missing in the video? Maybe the video is more adapted for in-class training than online. So some tips are more for in-class, in architect role. What is missing, maybe to insist on how to connect with the group, how to make each other in the group connected and confident before starting the process. And the difficulty between being an improviser and respecting the time constraints.
Thank you. Yes, very good. One or two more people, perhaps, if anybody else would like to share from their groups. Anybody else? Jenny, yes, please.
Hello. What was really interesting in that video for me was the point about the inner work, because I think as facilitators, we all know that we do inner work. Sometimes we need a lot of inner work, but I've never heard or seen it expressed that we do it. So it was quite a nice recognition of, yes, we do it. And I think we never talk about that work publicly when we talk about what facilitators do.
Thank you. David.
Yeah, that came up in our conversation, what Jenny mentioned there. And I know I'm not an expert in coaching, but I do know that's a kind of a prerequisite to be a coach, that you have to have been coached to. And I think the inner work is important, but I'm just wondering, this question that came up is that something that we should be doing among ourselves, helping each other with that inner work, well, it just came up in our conversation too.
Thank you. Thank you. It sounds like you've had a very rich conversation. Thank you for sharing all of that. Let's draw this group conversation to a close now by asking, is there anything you'll do differently as a result of this conversation, or anything that you're inspired to go away and do that you wouldn't otherwise have thought of? Anything that you will explore or research more, perhaps? Anyone? What will you do differently? James.
I could fess up to the architect being the bit that I spend least time doing and need to spend more time doing. And it's one of those, one of my own things, my own criminal offences, which is I will never quite get that fact plan absolutely bang on just before we start it, and then run and then try and over improvise sometimes to get around that. So for me, I think it's that challenge about setting that really stable foundation and reminding myself how when I do it and I do it well, it's really helpful. I'm just remembering that always, just
very
to
good.
drive it through.
Yeah, thank you. This is a safe space for confessions, if anybody would like to join James there. Anyone else, what will you do as a result of this conversation?
Me back to the drawing board.
Make it a new drawing board, Beatrice, rather than
absolutely
back to the old one.
No, the new one.
Very good.
I'm realizing now why I noticed the clips. I think I have to take the clips off and put a new page on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Andrew?
Yeah, I think Beatrice, what you will do is very good, because it's even a bit complex, especially in the phase which is coming on right now, because we're talking about hybrid. I have a situation, for example, where I have to do a project and some of the people are going to be face-to-face, but some are going to be on video. So, and I have to make sure to do all the three things, and so the concept is the same, but the scenario is a bit different. And we need, I think the more we share about how we can help each other, because the concept is so, I find it so useful now, all the things which Martin is saying, which I don't want to repeat, but yeah, there are some situations which are a bit, so it's not just going on video, on virtual, but even now with the hybrid thing.
Thank you. I think we're going to have to draw the conversation to a close there, because hybrid, I'm quite sure, will require at least a whole meetup session of its own, probably many of them. I think it's going to get very big. Thank you so much. That was a rich conversation. I hope you've all found it valuable. And Beatrice, I've had many of these conversations about this video, and it never fails to generate a rich conversation. So thank you for the video. It really has been a service. Let me transition now from the role of facilitator, which I've been trying to demonstrate, to the role of presenter. And I'm going to hopefully share only the slides with you this time instead of my whole screen, and take 10 or 15 minutes maybe to talk you through some slides about the focused conversation method and the ORID model that underlies it. Let me just get my screen sorted out before I go into that. There we go. So the conversation that I just led with you was based on this ORID model. It was based on the focused conversation method of ICA's technology of participation. I mentioned ICA is an international non-profit organization. It's in about 40 countries, began about 50 years ago, and it developed the technology of participation as a means of enabling people in groups, communities initially, but latterly also organizations and other kinds of groups, to communicate more effectively together, to make decisions, to make plans together, but also to collaborate together, to get things done together, to make things happen. The values of the ToP approach, you'll see down the left-hand side. The methods of the ToP approach, there are five core methods, arguably, up to 60, depending on how you count them. But the ICA technology of participation training focuses particularly on the 5 core methods. I'm going to be focusing in this presentation just on the first 2, rational experiential aims and focused conversation. The aims are not so much a method on their own, actually. They sort of underpin all of the methods. But the aims are critical here, and this is perhaps not entirely unique to the ToP approach, but I think it's a particular gift of the ToP approach, that in ToP facilitation we challenge ourselves as facilitators to try to articulate the aims of the group in 2 dimensions, what we call the rational aim and also the experiential aim. This isn't about your aims as a facilitator, it's about you as a facilitator understanding what the group's aims are and helping them understand what their aims are. But it's about understanding them and articulating them in these two different dimensions. So by rational aim, we mean what does the group need to know, understand, or decide, up here in the head largely. And by experiential aim, we mean what experience do we want our participants to have? Or alternatively, how do we want them to be affected by the process or to be changed by the process, perhaps internally or between themselves in terms of their relationships among themselves? So for example, in the case of this conversation, I didn't specify this particularly before we started, but my aim for this conversation was for you all to learn something about each other and about facilitation and about the role of the facilitator. And in this case, in a training or a demonstration setting, my experiential aim was to give you an opportunity to experience ORID in the ToP focused conversation method. But it could just as well also have been to inspire you or intrigue you by the potential of ORID or by the potential of facilitation, for example. It's important to think of both dimensions of aim because particularly in Western culture, or at least in British culture that I'm most familiar with, we tend to discount experiential aim and overvalue the rational aim. Some cultures may be entirely the opposite. So we may focus more on experiential than rational. I find in my experience that very often my clients come to me saying, can you help us answer a question or solve a problem or develop a strategy or make a decision or make a plan? It's usually about what goes on up here that the clients have front of mind in my experience, in my context. And when I say, oh, sure, tell me a little bit more about that, what usually comes out then is, we tried before and it was really hard and it was really painful and we all fell out with each other and nobody trusts each other to do it without a facilitator anymore, and that's why we're inviting you to join us. And very often what's most important to groups is actually the experiential side of things. A decision in itself is not so important as how people feel about the decision, a sense of commitment, a sense of ownership, a sense of trust in each other, commitment to each other. And the experiential aim is where that comes from, is how that's articulated. The ORID model is the model that underpins the focused conversation method and in fact all of ICA's technology of participation. And it's based on a model of human experience, a model of how we as human beings experience life. So the model suggests that all of us, all of the time, whether or not we're aware of it, first experience ourselves and our experience through our senses. We know that we're alive, we know what's going on within us and beyond us through our senses, through our sense of touch, taste, sight, sound, and smell. Based on our sensory perception, we have some kind of a emotional or intuitive response, which we call in the model the reflective level. So we might be surprised, we might be intrigued, we might be shocked, or we might be reminded of something. We might have a hunch about our experience. That's what we call the reflective level. According to the model, our head only kicks in to make sense of our sensory perception and our reflective level reaction to that. So the interpretive level is where we begin to make sense of our experience, ideas, theories, form. We begin to draw conclusions. And it's only after all of that that we actually come to some sense of resolution, or possibly even decision, or possibly even action. That's what we call the decisional level. So for example, when my alarm goes off this morning, and I hear it vaguely through half sleep, I roll over and in autopilot hit the snooze button to make it stop. Gradually I'll realize that, oh, that was the alarm that went off and it's on snooze and I'm semi-awake. I need to wake up because I've got work to do today, so I switch the light on to make sure that I don't go back to sleep again. That's me going through 4 levels of ORID in the space of about 10 seconds, not even conscious of it. The model suggests we all go through this all of the time, and groups go through it too. And the point of applying a model such as this to a conversation or to facilitation is that facilitation is about human process. Jeffer, if you want a concise definition, I may have told you this before, my definition of facilitation is group process leadership. Essentially, the way I think about facilitation, it's about intentionally leading a group through a process to achieve some kind of goal together. And the point of the model is that if you want to take a human being through a process or a group of human beings through a process, what better model to design your process by than a model of how we naturally think and respond and behave. Another advantage of using the model, or a particular advantage of using the model, is that it helps make the process inclusive, because different people and also different cultures, institutional as well as national cultures, may be stronger and more comfortable at one level than another. So you may be an objective kind of person that likes to be really clear about the facts, and you like to, see a list or create a list or work with spreadsheets. You might be a reflective level person that likes to, take time to reflect. You might like to doodle or draw as you're thinking or speaking or listening. You might think more in images than words, or you might be an interpretive kind of person who likes to, think analytically and think through pros and cons and possible scenarios and all of this. Or you might just be the kind of person that just likes to get on and do it and see what happens. So different people are more inclined to jump straight into one level or another, to give more value or more emphasis to one level or another, and to pay more attention to one level or another. So by designing a process according to these 4 levels, you can enable every member of a group to contribute to their strength and to have an opportunity to shine. And to make the process more inclusive, but also more productive and constructive for everyone. So the way this works in relation to the focused conversation method is that you use these 4 levels of human process as a structure for designing a series of questions. This slide may be too small for you to read, but I'll be sharing all the slides with you afterwards. But the point is that you think through, you come up with some questions that will elicit the objective level of people's experience, and then some questions that will elicit the reflective level, and so on. And all of the questions that you ask collectively will be designed to enable the group to achieve their rational and experiential aim together. Questions are essentially the primary tool of facilitation, I would say. All facilitation in one way or another is about asking questions. And the great power of the ORID framework and the focused conversation method is that you will never again be at a loss to wonder what question to ask or what order to ask your questions in. So I'll give you a couple of examples here. From the video clip, I could be asking you this. The first questions that I asked, do you remember in the chat, I invited you to write in the chat, what do you recall seeing and hearing from the clip, in particular words or phrases, but then also images, characters, music, etc. That was the objective level. What did you actually see and hear? Remember that? Does anybody remember what the reflective level question was? Go ahead and raise your hand or shout if you remember. There may have been 2 or 3 reflective level questions. Beatrice?
One was, were there any surprises?
Thank you, yes. I think I asked if there was anything surprising or intriguing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you remember that? And somebody, was it Tanya, maybe said there was nothing very surprising or intriguing, it was all very familiar, reminded me of my own experience. That's also very reflective. And I followed up on that and took advantage of that. Thank you for that, Tanya. And I said, anybody else? Was anybody else reminded of anything of their experience? And we had a few responses about that. That's also very reflective level. And I had actually prepared that, but I took advantage of Tanya's contribution to make it sound like it was emergent, and it had just arisen from the conversation. What about the interpretive level questions? Who remembers those? Anyone?
Was it related to the question that we went to the breakout rooms?
It was the questions in the breakout rooms, exactly. Which was something like this. How relevant are the metaphors? Actually, I asked you a slightly different question about the metaphors. I asked you before you went to breakouts, what other metaphors come to mind? And then in the breakout groups, I asked you what insights you could apply, what would you add to the 3 metaphors, and what would you learn or practice more? Remember that? What would you learn or practice more is beginning to move to the decisional level. And if we'd finished the conversation there, that would play the role of the decisional level. But I got a little bit more decisional after that by asking you in the closing round, what will you do differently? Or what will you do next as a result of this conversation? Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm. Often in the interpretive level, I ask something like, well, what's the significance of what we just heard, so whatever it was, to our work, you know?
Thank you. Yeah, perfect. That's a classic interpretive question. Another example here. Did you notice you had an ORID conversation even before I started demonstrating the ORID conversation? Now you know. What experience do you have, if any, of ORID and the ToP methodology? Was first question in our opening conversation, and I asked you to type that in the chat. What common themes have we heard? I think I asked you to share any common themes or anything you noticed in the chat. What does this tell us about what we might learn together? And what are your hopes for our session together? So those 2 conversations already illustrate that ORID is a really handy way of helping a group reflect on a shared experience together, as we did on the video. And you can use it a million ways in facilitation, regardless of what else you're using to facilitate a group. You can always find value from having a group reflect on their experience together of the exercise they just did, or the year they've just had, or the last 20 years they've just had for that matter. But it also works really well as a way of bringing a group together to embark upon a shared experience together. Are there any questions, first of all, before I go on? Any questions about what I've shared with you so far, about the model and how it applies to the method? Anyone?
Yes, I do have a question. Sorry, it's a bit fuzzy in my head still, but I'll try to be clear on the first. So the objective and the senses, I suppose it needs to be on the topic that the facilitation is about. My thought is more and more of these meetings or facilitation start with how do you feel? You have to make we call that a weather check. In French, it's faire la météo du jour. Just saying, yes, I'm feeling good, I'm in it, it's a check-in, etc. Why do you place that sort of thing in this method, or is it outside? Is it before? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me come to that in a moment when I talk about examples of application. I will absolutely address that. Are there any other questions about the model or about how it applies to creating questions, or shall I go right ahead to the examples of application?
Martin, just a quick question that
yes.
I really found it very inclusive methods. I just wonder that is it working when you're having a planning or problem solving workshops as well? And I mean, how has been your experience in those sessions? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, there's a reason that this session is titled the way it is. Is there a universal principle of facilitation? Because I regard this as, it's maybe not a principle, it's a model or a tool or a method. But in my experience, there's something universal about it. as a way of designing and leading conversation or designing facilitation processes more generally, there is literally never an occasion when I don't use it or refer to it or take value from it somehow. I mentioned that the session was inspired by a blog post, and the blog post was inspired by a conversation at a meetup. I've just put a link in the chat to the original blog post, and that explains a little bit how you can use ORID to have any kind of conversation about anything. If you want to ask the group to answer a question, well, you can start by asking them, what do we know about this question at the objective level? Then you can say, well, how do we feel about this question? And then you can ask them, well, what are some of the ways we might answer this question? And then you can say, well, how shall we answer this question? So literally anything can be broken down into 4 levels. Whatever you start with, you can always break it down into 4. And by breaking one question or one step of a process or one process down into 4, you can make it more inclusive and more engaging and effective. That's my experience. I'll give you some examples. I've got 6 examples here of application of ORID. The first one is the conversation that we've just had, essentially, and there's a link on this slide to a blog post when I first used this video clip in a ToP facilitation training course in Brussels, which was in 2013 by the looks of it. And I've been using it ever since in my ToP training. So there you go, the conversation that we've just had. It also works online. This was from an International Facilitation Week Twitter chat, also in 2013. And now a Twitter chat, if you've ever experienced or led one of those, you'll know that it doesn't happen in sequence. You can ask the questions in sequence, but they won't get answered in sequence. But it can still be handy to have a sequence behind the questions you ask. And I found in this case, by asking the questions on Twitter in an ORID sequence, even though the answers came from all over the place in a complete random order from whoever happened to discover it on Twitter at the time, when I sorted all the answers out afterwards, it made a lot of sense, and we came up with some quite rich and valuable result from it. It also works not just as a framework for designing a short conversation, but as a framework for designing a longer session. So for example, this is an example of applying ORID in conjunction with World Cafe. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that. I shan't describe it at length, but it's essentially a means of enabling a relatively large group to have what feels like a quite intimate, small conversation together by having people talk at small tables or in small breakout groups and then move from group to group between rounds of conversation. And ORID is the perfect framework, very often in my view, for structuring the conversations. You can have an objective level question in the first round, reflective in the second round, and by the time the whole group comes round to decisional at the end, it feels like they've all gone, from beginning to end of a meaningful and engaging conversation together. A half-day consultation, in this case, we used ORID at the beginning and at the end of the half-day workshop for the opening introductions and for the closing reflection. And we also used ORID as a structure for the session as a whole. So the first element of the session was the opening introductions, getting clear about who was here and what we wanted from the session. That was all the objective level of the half-day session. The reflective of the half-day session, we used the historical scan method of ICA's ToP approach, which is itself effectively an ORID process. It involves building a shared timeline of a group's journey of shared experience over time, typically by writing cards and sticking them on the wall. And then you have an ORID conversation about what you see. Well, that method played the role of the reflective level in the larger process of the half-day workshop in this case, because they were sharing stories and sharing reflections. We used a more analytical framework at the interpretive level to analyze factors affecting leadership in this case. I think that was a 4x4 from memory on flip charts that people did in small groups. And then the decisional level was brainstorming actions, again, in this case on a sticky wall, and we used dot voting to prioritize the actions. In this case, a whole day away day. Again, in this case, we used the wall of wonder at the reflective level. In this case, we used World Cafe at the interpretive level. This kind of illustrates how whatever other methods and tools you're using, you can choose to use methods and tools at one level or another. Now, some methods like dot voting, for example, are particularly good at decisional level, and they're not maybe so great at the other levels. Other methods like use of Lego serious play or metaphor, drawing or collage or applied theatre approaches, for example, all really great at the reflective level. Brainstorming is a classic objective level tool, but there are many tools and methods that you can use, and you can choose which methods and tools to use at which level in order to build a whole design. Finally, if you look at the strategic planning process of ICA's ToP, that is essentially also an ORID process, starting from who are we and what are we here for in doing a planning process, and what's our mission and values as an organization. All of that in the planning process constitutes the objective level. Imagining your desired future is essentially a reflective level element of the larger planning process. Analyzing your current reality and the obstacles to your vision of the future is the interpretive, and working out how far you want to get in the first year, who's going to do what, quarter by quarter, week by week, day by day. That's the nitty-gritty of the decisional level in terms of strategic and operational planning. So I hope you've seen from that something of how versatile ORID can be at multiple different levels. You can have ORIDs within ORIDs. You may want to start with a simple focused conversation in a group of 6 or 10, the way I demonstrated it, but I do encourage you to have a go. It looks suspiciously simple on the surface, David, but if you dig deep, it's actually really quite profound, the difference that it can make and the multiplicity of ways that you can use it. There's just a couple more slides here, I think. Further resources. I really very strongly recommend the book, The Art of Focused Conversation, published by ICA Canada. It's got about half of the book is on the theory of the method, and half of the book has no less than 100 sample conversations of how you might use the method in different workplace scenarios. So you can pick out a pre-designed conversation and adapt it to your own situation. If you're interested in the theory, Getting to the Bottom of ToP is the latest, I think it's the latest from ICA Associates in Canada. And it's all about the philosophy and theology that underpins this method that led to the development of it. There's training available from ICA UK and from other ICAs all over Europe and all over the world, and you'll find links to that in the slides when I share them tomorrow. And I'm not going to ask you all of these reflective level questions to reflect on the session, but if I were to do that, then of course I would use ORID. Any other questions or reflections? We've got about 5 minutes, I guess, before I need to hand over to Tanya to close. David, you have your hands raised, and I do apologize if anybody's been typing in the chat. I've not been paying attention. So if you've raised a question in the chat and want an answer, please raise it verbally with me now. David, and then Beatrice, please.
Thanks, Martin. Well, first of all, thank you for this great session. And I want to come back again to this suspiciously simple idea, which is kind of important for me. Could we say that when we talk about, like, divergent, emergent, convergent, that the OR and the I is breaking down the emergent into its constituent parts, where emergent typically would be both going on at the same time. Whereas in ORID, it's kind of saying, okay, let's just do this part first and this part after. Is that what's happening or not?
I think so, yes. One of the great powers of ORID is that when you get the hang of it, you can map ORID to just about everything else, which is just an argument, I suppose, that ORID is a universal principle, because if you try and map the ORID process onto any other facilitation process, you'll find it works. So yes, I'm sure it maps. It makes sense in my mind. The other way I would think about that, I don't know if any of you have come across, well, I do know that some of you have come across the consensus workshop method of ICA's ToP approach. That is a classic divergent convergent process with the emergence in the beginning, sorry, in the middle, in the groan zone. And that absolutely maps to ORID. You know, you brainstorm your data at the start at the objective level, you intuit some relationships between the data, and then make sense of what those relationships mean. That's the emergent part in the middle. And then you draw some conclusions as to what you're going to do with the results. That's the decisional bit at the end. That is an ORID process. It's a divergent and convergent process. So yes, I suppose it maps.
Thanks.
Beatrice.
I've often noticed that in that there's something very, I don't know, built in. I don't mean exactly intuitive, but I've found with smaller groups and usually, but not always, I start off with the objective questions, and before I know it, they're moving right into the R questions, yeah. You know, which is sort of affirming for the you know, saying this design is something that is not just a neutral concept.
It's not always quite as smooth as that, but what I will say in response to that is that very often I find that groups answer the question that I was just about to ask, which is very affirming of the method, but also of the particular design, the particular questions. And actually Tanya's response was a good example of that in a sense today. I was just about to ask, was there anything that's familiar or reminds you of the experience? In actual fact, I didn't get an answer to the earlier question, which was there anything surprising or intriguing? Or maybe I had one or two, I don't remember. But there were several examples tonight of people jumping ahead when I actually tried to draw them back. I don't know if any of you noticed, maybe I didn't ask the question as clearly as I might have done, or maybe you were just interpretive or reflective level people. But I was trying to ask the objective level, what did you see in the clip in terms of images and characters? And several of you responded at the level of metaphor and interpretation about the roles and the hats and the uniforms. Do you remember that right at the beginning? And each time I tried to bring the group back by saying, oh yes, so was it the image of the hat that you remembered? Was it the image of the uniform that you saw? And then I said, anybody else, what exactly did you see? What characters do you remember seeing? Do you remember the animals in the forest? That was my way of trying to bring the group back to make sure that the objective level people did have their chance to shine before the people who are ready to move on moved the group on. That makes sense. Michel.
Yes, I was wondering about, is it possible to sometime swap some levels or some letters, maybe start with the R level and then treat the O, and so obviously the D one is the last one, but sometimes with the spontaneity of the answers, as you explained, we are experiencing maybe the third level, and we have to come back to the second one or the first one. How about what about swapping some of the letters?
So a couple of things I would say about that. One is that ORID is a model of human process, and no model is perfect representation of reality. It's only a model. Reality is much messier than any model. And secondly, however elegant and accurate your design, your group is never going to be as elegant and as accurate as you design the process for it. And so there has to be an element of design and also an element of improvisation, as you discussed amongst yourselves in the conversation. Nevertheless, the model says that we all go through these 4 levels in that order. And the method suggests that you follow that order precisely because that's what the model says, and that is the way that we think and act. So if you miss a level out or go in the wrong order, you will be missing something. And the model tells you to beware of what you might be missing, which isn't to say that you might not choose to miss it, but the model can help you be aware of what you might be missing if you do miss it. The other thing I could say I neglected to mention earlier, just because there's 4 levels doesn't mean that every level deserves 25% of the group's time and attention. If you're using ORID for an objective level purpose, you might spend 90% of your time at the objective level, but then to make a complete process of it, you'll spend 10% on reflective interpretive decisional, just so that it's complete. Equally, if you're using ORID for a decisional level purpose, you might spend 90% of the decisional level, but to get there, you might need a little bit of time at the other levels first. We're out of time, I'm afraid, and I haven't even allowed 3 minutes for Tanya to do the closing as I promised. But as I said earlier, I do like to leave people wanting more. I'm happy to stay on afterwards for a few minutes if anybody would like to. I'm going to stop the recording now, however, and I encourage you to tweet. Use the ToP Facilitation hashtag if you tweet about any of this. I'll be happy to respond there, and I will be sharing the recording and the slides tomorrow on that hashtag and in the meetup group. Thank you all very much indeed. Over to you, Tanya.